He found a human toe in a jar of alcohol as he was cleaning out the cabin, and he took it to the local bar. They started serving it in a shot of whiskey to anyone who was brave enough. But eventually, someone accidentally swallowed it. Luckily, another toe was soon donated, and over the years, this happened again and again. The bar is now on its 25th human toe, but the rules have stayed the same. You can drink it fast, you can drink it slow, but the lips have got to touch the toe. The thief pushes the pen inside the zipper track, forcing the teeth apart. A small part of the track opens, giving them access to everything inside without ever unlocking the bag. They reach in, grab what they want before running the zipper slider back over the opening. This forces the teeth to snap back into place, which closes the track, making it look like the bag was never touched. If a gay bomb was dropped between you and another soldier, it would start to release a chemical gas into the air. Now, this gas would start to work on chemicals in your body to make you instantly attracted to the soldiers around you. And you would be too busy mingling with your fellow soldiers to focus on the battle in front of you. Ultimately, the idea didn't get past the planning stage, and the bomb was never used. Draw a line across a circle, then add a ball that will move across it back and forth. Keep adding lines, cutting the circle into a pie. Next, add a moving ball to each line. Each ball starts at a different angle, following its own path. But when they all move at once, a spinning circle appears inside, even though each ball moves in a straight line. When you peel it, it sticks to the outer layer of your skin. As you pull, the mask tugs at tiny hairs and sebaceous filaments, which are connected to sensitive nerve endings. The adhesive power of the mask also sticks to healthy skin, causing more pain when removed. In the process, it can even lift off tiny bits of the protective skin barrier, leading to irritation and redness. If you lit a cigarette on a spaceship, it would form a round blue flame, and it would just hover in place, feeding off whatever air was around it. If there was enough oxygen, the flame could suddenly flare up, spreading out in every direction. It would move in a slow, creeping sphere, sticking to surfaces and igniting them. Eventually, the fire could latch onto walls and air ducts, and in an enclosed spacecraft, it could become deadly in seconds. The toilet would flush even while the submarine was deep underwater. It used a complex system of valves, and only trained crew were able to use it. But when the captain went to the toilet, it didn't flush properly, and when someone tried to fix it, he opened the wrong valve. This caused water to flood in, and it reacted to the submarine's batteries, releasing a deadly gas. Choking and out of options, they were forced to surface, only to be spotted by the enemy, and moments later the submarine sank, destroyed by its own toilet. Most people think you should tilt your head back to stop the bleeding if you get a nosebleed. But tilting your head back can cause the blood to flow down your throat and into your stomach. This can lead to vomiting or even choking if the blood enters your airway. Instead, you should sit up straight and lean forward slightly. Then pinch the soft part of your nose just below the bony bridge. This helps apply pressure to the bleeding point and allows the blood to clot. The elderly person is forced into a freezing cold bath, causing their temperature to drop dangerously. Next, they're made to drink massive amounts of coconut milk, which causes their organs to fail. And eventually, the person dies from the damage. Now, this is supposed to be done for sick family members, to put an end to their suffering. But some people will actually kill their elderly family just to get their hands on their money. And even though it's illegal, police sometimes turn a blind eye, causing many elders to live in fear. If you took off your skin, could you just put on someone else's? Well, doctors would have to carefully remove it from their body without causing any damage. Then they'd need to cut it into grafts and attach each one to your body, making sure that it fits perfectly. But even if you managed to make it fit, your immune system would attack the new skin, most likely causing it to be rejected. If you pulled out someone's spine, could you use it like a whip? Well, human spines are made of many small bones, making them flexible. And when swung hard, these bones can hit with enough force to cut into your skin. Now, sharpening the bones would make it act like a serrated blade, slicing even more into flesh. And if you covered it with metal, it could be turned into a deadly flail, smashing anything in its way. When you stub your toe, the sensitive nerves under the skin are instantly crushed by the impact. At the same time, tiny vessels burst open, flooding the toe with blood. This causes it to swell, and as it does, it squeezes even more nerves, adding to the sharp, throbbing pain. With no fat or muscles to cushion your toe bone, the impact travels directly into it, making the pain even worse. They set up a baby monitor to keep an eye on their daughter because recently they had noticed open drawers and crooked window blinds, things that made them uneasy. The camera was a way to make sure nothing odd was happening. Hours later, in the middle of the night, the monitor crackled awake, instantly jolting her from sleep. She glanced at the screen and saw her husband standing over the crib, cradling their baby. She felt relieved until she realized her husband was lying right next to her. Panic surged as she grabbed a baseball bat and bolted into the nursery. She turned on the light, and her husband spun around, startled, clutching their baby. If this was her husband, then who was in her bed? He was fixing the pin setter when it suddenly activated. The machine moved down as if to set up the bowling pins, but the man was still underneath, and the weight of it crushed him instantly. With no one around to hear his cries, he was left to suffer from his injuries, and his body was found the next morning, still stuck in the bowling lane. She slammed into him, and he flew through her windshield, but she was drunk, and instead of calling for help, she drove home with him still stuck in the glass. Once she was in her garage, she apologized, only to leave him there for 2 more days as he bled out. When he finally died, she and her friends stuffed his corpse into a car trunk and dumped it in the park. But after she bragged about it at a party, police discovered her crime. If the seatbelt is around your pregnant belly and you get into a crash, it can transfer the force directly into your stomach. And this can cause the entire placenta to rip off completely, leaving your baby without a way to breathe. Now, you might think skipping the belt altogether might be safer, but even a sudden stop can throw your body forward, crushing your belly against the steering wheel. So instead, place it below your belly and across your hips. This spreads the force of the crash over your body, saving you and your baby's life. They set up a baby monitor to keep an eye on their daughter because recently they had noticed open drawers and crooked window blinds, things that made them uneasy. The camera was a way to make sure nothing odd was happening. Hours later, in the middle of the night, the monitor crackled awake, instantly jolting her from sleep. She glanced at the screen and saw her husband standing over the crib, cradling their baby. She felt relieved until she realized her husband was lying right next to her. Panic surged as she grabbed a baseball bat and bolted into the nursery. She turned on the light, and her husband spun around, startled, clutching their baby. If this was her husband, then who was in her bed? He was fixing the pin setter when it suddenly activated. The machine moved down as if to set up the bowling pins, but the man was still underneath, and the weight of it crushed him instantly. With no one around to hear his cries, he was left to suffer from his injuries, and his body was found the next morning, still stuck in the bowling lane. She slammed into him, and he flew through her windshield. But she was drunk, and instead of calling for help, she drove home with him still stuck in the glass. Once she was in her garage, she apologized, only to leave him there for 2 more days as he bled out. When he finally died, she and her friends stuffed his corpse into a car trunk and dumped it in the park. But after she bragged about it at a party, police discovered her crime. If the seatbelt is around your pregnant belly and you get into a crash, it can transfer the force directly into your stomach. And this can cause the entire placenta to rip off completely, leaving your baby without a way to breathe. Now, you might think skipping the belt altogether might be safer, but even a sudden stop can throw your body forward, crushing your belly against the steering wheel. So instead, place it below your belly and across your hips. This spreads the force of the crash over your body, saving you and your baby's life. If you tilt your bow as you shoot, the arrow will bend slightly once released. And if you do this at just the right angle, it pushes the arrow off course. As it moves through the air, the bend keeps pulling it to the side, and it will actually curve around the target instead of hitting it. Then, as the bend evens out, the arrow's path becomes straight, allowing you to shoot around objects. His skin froze before turning black as he rode his motorcycle in the freezing cold. And it was so bad that both his legs had to be amputated. But doctors noticed his injuries were too perfect, and the weather wasn't cold enough for frostbite. They discovered he'd actually left his feet in dry ice for 10 hours before he got on the motorcycle. You see, he was convinced he'd get millions in insurance and staged the accident. But he only received around $7,000, and after he was caught, he had to pay it back. The tank flew across the room, striking the boy in the head. You see, he was undergoing an MRI scan after a surgery. But during the procedure, a staff member accidentally brought a metal oxygen tank into the room. And when the machine was turned on, its massive magnet pulled the tank into the chamber where the boy was laying. And despite medical attention, he passed away 2 days later. If you're headed straight for a waterfall and can't escape, position the kayak to face the waterfall and stop paddling. Then hold your paddle with one end in the water to keep you steady. As you go over the edge, throw it behind you and tuck your body forward. This will help you land vertically, and you might make it out in one piece. The magician was locked in the transparent coffin, handcuffed and wrapped in chains. Next, it was lowered into a 7-foot hole, and as the audience watched, 7 tons of dirt and cement was poured over him. He planned to escape in under 30 minutes, but as soon as they finished pouring, the coffin suddenly collapsed. Rescuers tried to dig him out, but it was too late. He had already been crushed to death by his own stunt. A spy saw Washington crossing the river, planning a surprise attack. He quickly wrote a note and sent it to warn his commander. But when it arrived, the commander was busy playing cards and didn't bother to read it. Instead, he stuffed it into his pocket and kept playing. The next morning, Washington's troops attacked, catching the British off guard. During the fight, the commander was shot and fell to the ground. And as he lay there dying, the unread note that could have saved his life fell from his pocket. The chainsaw kicked back. It lodged in his skin, stopping just short of a major artery. Rescuers rushed to help, but removing the chainsaw would have caused him to bleed out in seconds. So they left it in place, carefully holding it steady as they took him to the hospital. And finally, surgeons were able to remove it, saving the man's life. Crack the cold eggs in a pan and add a chunk of butter. Stir them together over medium heat. This cooks them slowly while the butter oils the pan. As you mix, scrape the bottom to prevent it from burning. And every 30 seconds, take them off the heat for 10 seconds while stirring. This cooks the eggs gradually and folds air into the mix, making them fluffy and soft. After 3 minutes, take them off and add cream to stop them from cooking. Then season with salt and pepper to finish off your perfect eggs. As the snake crawls through the loop, the string tightens around its body. This is because the string is tied to a stick, twisted between several rubber bands, which are stretched across the handles of an open pair of pliers planted into the ground. When the snake pulls the string, the rubber bands unwind, making the stick snap back and release the tension. This tightens the string, securing the snake in the trap. If you had a whoopee cushion the size of a Cybertruck, it would send out a blast of air strong enough to push your friend over. But if you made it the size of a house, it could blow cars down a street. And if you made it as big as a city, one huge squeeze could rip off roofs, flip cars, and blow trees right out of the ground. He used his belt buckle to reflect sunlight towards the pilots to get their attention. You see, he had been lost in the woods for hours when it started to rain. He found shelter in a cave and spent the night there alone. The next morning, he heard helicopters flying above him. He was finally able to get their attention. The helicopter landed, the door swung open, and out stepped Harrison Ford. The doors suddenly closed, trapping his shoulders between them, and before he could react, the elevator shot upward. It pulled his body up with it, while his head hit the top of the doorway, and the force instantly decapitated him. A woman saw the whole thing inside the elevator, and after his death, she was trapped for 20 minutes with his headless body until rescuers finally freed her. If your eyelids were ripped off, the tears that keep your eyes wet would start to dry up. An hour later, the dryness could cause tiny scratches on the surface of your eyes. Over the next few days, without lids to clean away debris, your eyeballs might have open sores caused by dirt and dust. Sleeping would be difficult since you can't close your eyes, making them even drier and strained. Eventually, infections would develop, leading to serious eye damage and permanent blindness. The whoopee cushion burst as the children played, but suddenly they began to feel sick. Soon they were vomiting and even struggled to breathe, and they were rushed to the hospital, only surviving because of emergency oxygen. But this started happening all over the country. That's because the cheap toys were actually made with a dangerous chemical, and when they burst, toxic gas was released into the air, poisoning the children. A doctor injected what he thought was medicine into the man's spine, but it turned out to actually be a toxic chemical meant to preserve the patient's eye after surgery. Both bottles were unmarked and switched by another person in the operating room, and the doctor injected the wrong chemical into the patient. Within seconds, the toxic chemical traveled through the spinal fluid, causing irreversible brain damage. The man was considered brain dead and went into a coma, dying just 5 days later. The man swallowed his AirPod as he was sleeping, and without realizing, he woke up to drink some water. But he couldn't swallow and had to lean over the sink to let the water drain from his mouth. He thought nothing of it and went back to sleep. But the next morning, he felt pressure in his chest, and an X-ray revealed his AirPod stuck in his esophagus. The doctor inserted a lasso tool down his throat and pulled it out. Your head is forced onto a curb, and your teeth and jaw are pressed against the concrete edge. When the stomper applies force, your jaw is violently crushed against the curb. The pressure shatters your teeth and can break your jaw instantly. Your skull might also absorb some of the impact, causing severe trauma to your brain. This can cause serious damage or even death. A lava lamp's movements are completely unpredictable, and no two will ever move the same way. If you tracked the size, shape, and movement of the blobs and translated them into numbers, you'd have a true random number generator. One major internet security company records 100 lava lamps every second of every day. And from those recordings, they create truly random encryption keys, making it harder for hackers to break into your data. The The snake suddenly bit his thumb as he was studying it. But this snake was from Africa, and getting the antivenom would have taken way too long. So instead, he wrote down his symptoms as the venom spread. At first, he just had a fever, but after a few hours, his gums started to bleed, and by the next morning, his urine had turned to pure blood. But the scientist still didn't go to the hospital. Instead, he ate his breakfast and kept recording his symptoms until the venom finally killed him. A pigeon slammed right into his face, and he instantly lost consciousness while riding his motorcycle. But as he blacked out, his hand twisted the throttle, pushing the bike's speed beyond 120 miles per hour. Within seconds, he veered off the road and smashed straight into a tree, flying through the air. He landed hard on the pavement, shattering his leg and causing multiple fractures to his skull. Fortunately, he was rushed to the hospital where he managed to survive. They implanted a microphone in its ear, a transmitter in its skull, and a wire in its fur. Then they spent years training the cat to listen to human conversations. The sound would be transmitted through the wire and picked up by spies waiting nearby. When it was finally ready for its mission, they released it near a Soviet embassy, hoping to eavesdrop. But just moments later, it was run over by a taxi, putting an end to the $20 million operation. He slipped in the snow and broke his neck. But even though he screamed for help, no one was around to hear him. He laid in freezing conditions, wearing only his pajamas. But his dog heard his cries and laid on top of him to keep him warm. She licked his face to keep him awake and barked for help. And she did this for almost 24 hours straight. A neighbor finally heard and found the man, barely alive, and he ended up surviving thanks to his dog's devotion. She fell on her metal straw. The lid held it in place, and this caused it to impale her eye. It pierced through her socket and went right into her brain. And by the time she was found, she was completely unresponsive. The 10-inch straw stayed in her skull until she made it to the hospital. But even though doctors removed it, the brain injury killed her in the end. They left the scissors inside his body and didn't notice when they sewed him up. But over the next 2 decades, he only had the occasional stomachache, so he mostly ignored them. But when it started getting worse, he finally went to the hospital. Doctors did an ultrasound and they were shocked to discover the scissors inside him. After 18 years, they were finally removed, leaving the man pain-free. If you flushed a fish down the toilet, it would flow into the sewer system, a giant underground network filled with dirty water and trash. Then the fish would reach a wastewater treatment plant, where the water is cleaned with chemicals that are deadly to fish. And even if it managed to escape alive, it would most likely end up in a river, where predators and pollution make survival unlikely. Use a needle to gently trace along the edges, weakening the outline. If you get a simple shape, you can snap the outside off to save time. But with complex shapes, it's safer to lick the back of the candy, leaving a thick layer of spit. You see, your saliva softens the sugar and dissolves the edges, making it easier to carve. And you can also use a lighter to heat the needle and melt the candy faster. The baby dropped down the sewer pipe, getting stuck in the tight space, and rescuers spent 2 hours carefully cutting him out. When they did, they realized that the afterbirth was still attached, meaning he had only just been born. At first, they thought he was abandoned, and soon found bloody tissues in a woman's apartment. But she explained she was on the toilet when she suddenly gave birth, and the baby just fell down the pipe. As the numbers flashed, he realized he had just won $31 million. Overjoyed, he bought a mansion for himself and houses for his family. He handed out cash to friends, donated to his church, and even gave money to strangers. But soon, the excitement faded. And this happened because no matter how much your life improves, your brain eventually adjusts, bringing you back to your normal baseline level of happiness. Meaning that no matter what, you'll eventually lose the feeling. The man became depressed and got angry when people asked him for things. He became so upset that his wife left him and took the kids. Alone and overwhelmed, he locked himself in his room. The jackpot that initially changed his life ultimately led him to end it. As he reached for his money, a note slipped through claiming that someone was trapped inside. News outlets ran with the story, reporting that a man was somehow stuck in the ATM. The story spread like wildfire, with many speculating if it was even possible for someone to fit in such a tiny space. When police arrived, they did find the man, but he was actually trapped in a maintenance room behind the ATM, not in the machine itself. He went in to repair it when the door got stuck behind him, and with no phone to call for help, he wrote notes and slipped them through the receipt slot. He tried to light his shoe on fire mid-flight, but the attendant smelled the burning matches and saw what he was doing. Passengers and crew wrestled him to the ground, and eventually he was sedated. And when they checked his shoes, they discovered a fuse sticking out of each one. It turned out they were stuffed with enough explosives to bring down the entire plane. And that's why you have to take off your shoes at the airport. If you flushed a toilet at the bottom of the ocean, it would send about a gallon of seawater spinning down the drain. But the ocean holds over 300 quintillion gallons of water, meaning if you started flushing right now, it would take over 61 trillion years to drain the entire thing. Now, if you had a toilet bigger than the United States, you could do it in one flush. When a firing squad shoots a prisoner, one of the bullets actually isn't real. You see, one of the rifles is loaded with a blank, but it still fires and kicks back when the trigger is pulled. The soldiers aren't told which rifle it is, casting doubt on who actually shot and killed the man. This way, the soldiers can feel less guilty and sleep at night, knowing there was a chance that they weren't the one to kill him. He illegally entered the cockpit of an empty plane and took to the skies. He was a baggage handler for the airline and had no formal pilot training. Air traffic controllers were told the plane was stolen and contacted him over the radio. For over an hour, he performed daring stunts, including barrel rolls, while air traffic controllers pleaded with him to land safely. Eventually, he crashed the plane on a remote island to avoid hurting any innocent people. He jumped out as his plane was hit by enemy fire, but as he parachuted to the ground, they kept shooting. So he played dead, but a plane flew in close to inspect him. And as it opened its canopy, he whipped out his pistol. Before the pilot could react, he fired 4 rounds into the cockpit. The fighter spun out of control while the man landed on the ground. And even though he was captured, he was later celebrated as a hero. If you fired a bullet made of diamond, you might think it could tear through anything because diamonds are the hardest substance in the world. But they're also brittle, meaning they shatter under extreme force. When fired, the pressure inside the gun barrel would cause the diamond to crack before it even leaves. Now, if you shot it with a crossbow, it might be gentle enough to keep it intact. But at this lower speed, it wouldn't be going fast enough to do any serious damage. He milked the venom from the snake before injecting it into his veins, but it was such a small amount that he was unharmed, and this allowed him to build up antibodies. Over the next 20 years, he did this 700 times, injecting more and more venom, and eventually he built up a tolerance. He's now been bitten over 200 times by some of the world's most deadly snakes, and he survived each one. Eventually, his blood could be used to create a universal antivenom, saving people from all kinds of snake bites. He would hold the fuel in his mouth and spit it into a flame, causing a massive fireball. But this time, he accidentally swallowed some of the liquid. As he brought the flame to his lips, he burped, and the fire ignited the vapors, traveling down his throat and into his stomach. This triggered a huge explosion. The crowd erupted in applause, thinking it was part of the act. But they soon realized he had been blown to pieces as body parts rained down, and his head was later found in the popcorn machine. He ran around his apartment in virtual reality, but the game didn't map his apartment properly, and as he played, he tripped on a glass table. He landed hard, which shattered it instantly, and dozens of glass shards sliced into his body. With no one there to help, he bled out quickly, and by the time he was found, he had died in both realities. As she sneezed, it ruptured a disc in her spine, and when it collapsed, a nerve got trapped between her two vertebrae. Suddenly, she couldn't move, and even though she had 3 separate operations, she still suffered extreme pain. For the next 2 years, she was bedridden, needing painkillers so strong she would hallucinate. But finally, doctors inserted a plastic cage around her spine, relieving pressure on the pinched nerve. And within a week, she was walking again and holding in her sneezes. A drill is used to cut a hole in the ice, and a hook from a specially made fishing rod is lowered into the cold water. Below the ice, the fish have slowed down for the winter, but if the fisher is lucky, one will still bite. The tug travels up the line where the fisher will feel it and pull out the fish, and after, the water will refreeze, filling the hole again. If you get kicked by a horse, it would shatter your ribs instantly, and the pieces would pierce your organs, causing massive internal bleeding. A kangaroo, on the other hand, would use its tail for balance before kicking you with both feet. This would damage your organs, and its claws would leave deep gashes in your chest. But a gorilla could punch you with over 1,000 pounds of force, breaking your bones and knocking you unconscious. And the second punch would almost certainly kill you. When the bass takes your bait and swims away, you'll see your line moving. Quickly tighten your line by reeling in the slack. Then snap your rod tip upwards in a firm, quick motion. This motion will drive the hook to pierce the tough part of the bass's mouth. To remove, gently guide the hook out along the curve it went in until it pops loose. The bear charged at the woman in her backyard, ready to attack, but right before it struck, her wiener dog barked and lunged at the bear, forcing it to stop. The bear swiped at the dog, slicing into its skin, but it didn't back down, and the distraction gave the woman enough time to defend herself. The dog chased the bear off, barking until it disappeared into the woods. If you tried to push a shark back into the ocean, it could easily twist and bite you. This is because its jaw is designed to snap sideways, making it easy to grab anything nearby. Instead, help it breathe by splashing water over its gills. Then stand behind the fins where it can't reach you and push gently towards deep water. As soon as it moves, get out of the way fast before it turns back. The vat was filled with a strange greasy substance, along with human bones and a gold ring. Now, the owner told the police that his wife had run away, but when they searched the basement of his sausage factory, they discovered that he had boiled her body in caustic chemicals and dissolved nearly all of her remains. People believed that he had been planning to turn the rest of her into sausage. He was immediately taken to court, where he was sentenced to life in prison. As they pierced her ear, the gun caused micro cracks in the cartilage, which allowed bacteria to survive. 3 weeks later, her ear was swollen, red, and leaking pus. Doctors found that a bacterial infection had eaten away part of her cartilage. She became resistant to antibiotics, forcing surgeons to drain the wound and perform reconstructive surgery. Experts warn piercing guns are often unsanitary, and hollow needles are much safer. Steel spikes shoot out from the front of the police car's bumper once it reaches a fleeing vehicle. This pole goes under the vehicle, and it drives into the spikes. Instantly, they puncture the rubber and create small controlled holes. These slowly deflate it instead of causing a dangerous blowout. And within seconds, the fleeing car loses control, forcing the suspect to stop. They would roll ink over a metal letter before pressing them onto paper. These letters were each placed by hand, spelling out every word. To keep things organized, they stored the big letters in the upper compartments, since they weren't used as much. But the smaller letters were needed all the time, so they were kept in the lower compartments, making them easier to grab. Over time, people started referring to them as uppercase and lowercase letters. The dog was placed in a sack attached to the side of a car, and it would just hang above the road with its head sticking out. The bottom of the sack was clamped to the step along the side of the car, and the top was hooked to an open window. But car accidents usually meant the dog was toast. The antlers hooked into his belt and took off running, dragging the emperor behind him. He slammed into rocks and trees, breaking bones and suffering internal injuries. His guards struggled to keep up as the stag continued to run over the rough terrain. After 16 miles, a servant was able to catch up and cut the belt with a knife. Finally freed, the emperor accused the servant of trying to murder him and ordered for his execution. But the emperor's injuries were too severe, and he died shortly after. They pulled out the bear's teeth and ripped out its claws to make it a fair fight, and they even cut tendons in its arm to stop it from grabbing its opponents. You see, these bears were used in live wrestling matches, which were held in bars in the 90s. People would fight the trained bears, and if they won, they could claim a cash prize. Some people would even cheat by getting the animals drunk before the match. But the bears were still far stronger, easily pinning the wrestlers to the ground. He crushed up a butterfly, drew it up into a needle, and injected himself with it. And he did this because of an online challenge. But butterflies actually contain poisonous chemicals. He began throwing up almost immediately as the toxins spread throughout his body. And inside his veins, the poison triggered a reaction, causing them to swell. As it traveled, his organs began shutting down one by one. Doctors rushed to help, but it was already too late. He was dead, all because of a dumb trend. You could stuff a tire in your mouth if your cheeks were like a hamster's. That's because you would have an extra 2.5 square feet of skin that would be able to stretch to your shoulders. The skin would fold inward like hidden pockets, forming deep pouches that expanded into your neck. With so much space, you could fit over 60 Big Macs. And with all that food, your mouth would need to make 7 cups of saliva just to break it down and swallow. If you get a lobotomy, a long metal pick would be inserted through your upper eyelid, entering the brain's frontal lobe. Once in place, the doctor would swivel the pick, severing connections inside the frontal lobes. This area contains the brain's center for emotion and personality. Doctors once believed that by breaking these brain connections, this procedure would stabilize behavior and calm intense emotions. He had a seizure in front of his dog, who grabbed the man's phone from his pocket because it sensed something was wrong. It pawed at the emergency call button, and dispatchers heard the man seizing, sending police and medics to his house. And when they arrived, the dog led them to where the man was lying. They took him to the hospital, and the doctors were able to save his life thanks to the dog's quick thinking. If you get shot with an arrow, most people would just go ahead and remove it. But pulling the arrow out can cause even more damage. You see, when an arrow enters your body, it creates a wound channel, and the shaft can actually keep the damage somewhat contained. Removing it can tear through blood vessels, causing heavy bleeding. Most arrows are also barbed, meaning they can rip through more tissue on the way out. Instead, you should leave the arrow in place and seek medical help immediately. If you try to swallow a huge piece of food, your body will attempt to force it out by coughing. But if it's too big, it causes a total blockage in your throat, and no air can get through. Without oxygen, you can lose consciousness within minutes. But if you swallow something like a pen cap, the opening will allow for some air to pass through. It'll still be difficult to breathe, so have someone perform the Heimlich maneuver until the force pushes out the object. If you peeled off all your skin, your body would lose moisture almost immediately, causing severe dehydration. Next, you'd have no barrier to stop bacteria, so infections would spread quickly through your body. And you'd also lose heat quickly, leading to hypothermia. Finally, exposed blood vessels would leak fluid, leading to shock, a drop in blood pressure that stops organs from working. And within hours, it would be impossible to survive. She had to shave her hairy nose every few days just to look normal. You see, she was attacked by a dog, which bit off a chunk of her face. To fix the damage, doctors pulled down a piece of her forehead, using it to replace the missing flesh. But the new skin included part of her scalp, and the hair follicles were transplanted with it. Once it healed, they started to grow, giving her a hairy nose. But eventually, she actually grew to like it. The teller could secretly press a button with their foot if they were being robbed. That button would set off a loud bang. Then a hidden can would spray thick yellow gas all over the room. The gas would make it really hard to breathe and cause painful coughing, and the robber would get dizzy and pass out within seconds. But everyone else in the bank would also breathe in this gas, meaning workers and customers would be trapped, coughing and choking, which is why the system never caught on.